Squid Game, now Netflix's most watched show of all time, is a South Korean survival drama about a group of people who become participants in a twisted set of life or death games. Betrayal, greed, and self-preservation are constant themes throughout the show, and what has stood out to many is the gritty brutality with which the games take place, with characters frequently murdering one another in cold blood just to get a better chance of winning an obscene amount of money. But what if I told you that the actual message of Squid Game was a positive one, of a belief in the fundamental triumph of human kindness? What if I told you that Squid Game was actually an optimistic show? This idea centers on the main character Gi-hun, who through his journey in the show grows and learns to become the physical representation of human kindness itself. And it's through his conflict with his childhood best friend Sang-woo that we see a battle take place between cynicism and optimism, between kindness and selfishness, between two sides of human philosophy. Through Gi-hun's ultimate triumph in the Squid Game, and more importantly, how he triumphs, the show tells us a message that even in the absolute lowest of situations, even in the toughest of environments, human kindness can and should win. So let's take a look and see why Squid Game is an optimistic show. To understand why Squid Game's message is ultimately a positive one, we must start at the end, specifically episode 9. Having survived the horrors of the games, we find that Gi-hun is something of a broken man. Despite the money he has in his bank account, he is choosing to live his old life again in misery. That is, until he is mysteriously summoned by someone claiming to be his ganbu. And lo and behold, when he arrives, he finds his ganbu Ilham, who he thought was dead, waiting for him, and revealed as the mastermind behind the games. The conversation that the two men have is basically a perfect microcosm of the show as a whole, a snapshot which represents not only the themes, but also the message of Squid Game. An emotional Gi-hun begins by questioning Ilham, desperate for answers as to what the games meant and why he, of all people, got to live. The old man, though, seemingly isn't listening, and proposes that Gi-hun plays another game with him. At first, this sparks rage in Gi-hun, who threatens to kill Ilham right there if he doesn't talk. When Ilham reminds him that if he dies, he takes his secrets with him, Gi-hun calms down and agrees to play his little game. So, Ilham proposes that they watch the homeless man on the street and see if anyone comes to help him. If they don't, he wins. If they do, then Gi-hun wins and he will answer all his questions in exchange. This is where we see a great example of the show's most important theme. As time passes and it seems that no one is going to help the homeless man, Ilham asks, "Do you still trust people after everything you've been through?" And here lies our central question. Do you, Gi-hun, still trust people after living through the games? Do you, the viewer, still trust people after what you've seen in this show up until this point? Interestingly, Gi-hun doesn't answer the question and we're left in suspense, both to his feelings and of course, whether someone will help the homeless man or not. We're waiting to see what the show tells us about humanity, what its message is, and eventually someone does show up and they bring help with them. And this is the triumphant message of Squid Game. In the end, human kindness wins, both for the man on the street and for Gi-hun in his final gamble with Ilham. That's why even though the old man dies and Gi-hun doesn't get to ask him any more questions, he is calm and somber. This is the finale of a pattern which is consistent throughout Squid Game. When people, and Gi-hun in particular, is confronted with something abhorrent, anger is usually his primary and initial emotion, followed by a struggle and fight, and eventually the realization that kindness is an option, which ultimately triumphs. This message is only further solidified by Gi-hun and Sang-woo's journey throughout the show. When we meet them, they are both in radically different places in their lives. In fact, they're about as different can be. And if we trace their journeys, we will again see evidence of the positive, optimistic message that Squid Game is providing us. At the beginning of the show, Gi-hun is an unlikable layabout who exploits his elderly mother for money to blow it away while gambling, all while he continues to be a second-rate dad. Sang-woo, at least as we're told about him, is a genius and successful in every way. He has a prestigious degree, a well-paying job, and a life that sees him respected by everyone around him. So much so that he is the pride of his entire neighborhood. And yet, both these men end up in the games, mirroring the message that Ilham tells us, that for someone with no money and someone with too much money, life is not enjoyable. And so, it is their journeys from here on in which reflect this battle between optimism and cynicism within the show. Between a desperate poor man striving for survival and a jaded man full of wealth, hungry for more. As the episodes progress and we go deeper through the games, both their characters will go through drastic changes in opposite directions. Take the first game for example. Gi-hun is quite weak and helpless, paralyzed from fear when the red light green light game begins, and he struggles to deal with the sheer horror of what he's seeing. Sang-woo meanwhile is instantly in control, figuring out the game quickly. He is still a kind person, so he helps Gi-hun, giving him advice on how to survive red light green light. But despite that, Gi-hun almost falters and needs a timely intervention from Ali to save his life. This is another important theme in the games. At every stage, acts of kindness are key to who survives and who doesn't, as much as the ostensible acts of violence that we see. Here are the first two, Sang-woo's advice and Ali putting his life on the line for Gi-hun. This is something we will return to later. But after the first game, the players protest at their fate, and it is the canny Sang-woo who remembers that there's a clause that would allow them to leave, and he triggers the vote that might allow that. However, now we see their characters start to differ. When the potential prize money is displayed to the players, Sang-woo actually votes to continue the game, something that surprises Gi-hun because he doesn't expect this from his friend. What he doesn't realize though is that he and his friend are already two different people with entirely different outlooks on life. And this will be demonstrated when they're both let out back into the real world. Already changed by the events of the games, Gi-hun returns home and begins to reflect on his life. He finds out about his mother's worsening condition and begs her to get treated at the hospital. When she decries that they don't have enough money to do that, Gi-hun realizes that he's been a neglectful son and promises instead to bring home the money she needs for her treatment. In desperation, he turns to his ex-wife, hoping she might lend him some money, a request she promptly denies. But when her husband offers him some cash, Gi-hun feels he might have found some luck. Only this wasn't an act of kindness, but instead a bribe, an act of selfishness from Ga-young's stepdad, who wants Gi-hun to stay away from his own daughter in exchange for the gift. Gi-hun reacts violently, punching him before making a very important declaration. Do you think money solves everything? This statement is the perfect insight into not just the mindset that Gi-hun is in now, but also the perspective he will represent in the show. Already his time in the game has shown him that there are things more important than money, and in this case, he realizes that his daughter is more important to him than the money being offered to keep away from her. But he is in a desperate situation, and indeed money would solve his two problems by allowing him to pay for his mother's treatment and to reclaim guardianship of his daughter. As he's dwelling on what to do, he runs into Ilham outside a convenience store and he shares his alcohol with him, despite not having much to give. In turn, the old man shares his food with him, and this is a perfect metaphor for what will come later in the show, the power of sharing and kindness, and the reciprocity that it brings. But during their conversation, Ilham plants a message in Gi-hun's mind that represents the ideology of most of everyone in the games, that life out here in the cruel, unjust real world is perhaps worse than risking death in the games. And so reluctantly, Gi-hun returns, and he finds that Sang-woo has done too. It's important to note at this point that Sang-woo is not a cruel or evil character. In the time spent back outside, he too shows great acts of kindness. First, allowing Ali to borrow his phone, and then paying for his food and bus ticket. But the difference between Gi-hun and Sang-woo, as we will go on to see, is that for Sang-woo, acts of kindness are secondary. They only occur when they don't get in the way of what he wants, namely, the endless pursuit of money. Later on in the show, when Ali asks Sang-woo why he returned to the games in the first place, Sang-woo replies, "Because I had no money to make money." For Sang-woo, money is everything. It is the goal and the means. He's so obsessed with it that there's no tangible end to how much he wants. He just wants more, almost like it were a game in of itself. Remember that unlike Gi-hun and many of the other participants, he did have a lot of money, and a successful life that many would have been content with. But he bet it all on futures, along with the money he embezzled from others. And for what reason? Seemingly just because it was fun, and he got bored with the money he had. This again is where our characters start to show their differing ideologies, kindness versus self-preservation. Upon returning, Gi-hun immediately begins to talk about camaraderie and teamwork, comparing their experience here in the games to being like boot camp in the military. He asks if Ali and Sang-woo want to form a team, something that Sang-woo only agrees to because it has a clear, tangible benefit to him. But for Gi-hun, this decision is less about efficiency and more about friendship, which is why he happily allows Il-lam to join their team. Indulging in a bit of frivolity, he gives everyone imaginary ranks and starts telling stories about their childhood. Sang-woo, on the other hand, is here to win, not make friends. Not only is he visibly annoyed that Gi-hun allows Il-lam to join them, but he snaps at his friend, telling him to focus on the game instead of the bonding human connection that he's trying to make.
형, 옛날 생각할 시간 있으면 다음에 무슨 게임 할지나 생각해봐.
As the next game begins, we see these changing personalities start to manifest in the way the two men play the game as well. Where Gi-hun is still committed to a collective victory and asks what the team should do, Sang-woo commits an act of selfishness. Upon seeing the symbols, he figures out what the game is likely to be, but despite that, he suggests everyone splits up and takes the easiest symbol for himself. He's not without guilt on this decision, and he does hesitate, but it is one that he sticks with regardless, because to him, Gi-hun is as much competition as he is a friend. So although he may be overtly kind, when push comes to shove, Sang-woo chooses himself over anyone else. Thankfully, Gi-hun survives, and his little trick to lick the sugar saves the lives of others too, including Il-lam. Though he doesn't directly set out to help the old man, this again is that important theme that surrounds Gi-hun's actions in the games. The idea of collective good, of little acts of kindness that help others, whether directly or indirectly. When Il-lam thanks Gi-hun, they both share a happy moment, furthering their growing bond. After the game, an altercation over food sees Doksu attack and eventually murder a fellow competitor. Despite every participant seeing this happen, Gi-hun is the only one who protests, and angrily so. This is a great demonstration of how already he's one of the few people left in the games who still retain their humanity and capacity for compassion. Then, in the night that follows, as everyone is afraid of more attacks, Gi-hun is again focused on this idea of friendship and collective good. He reaches out to sae-byok and invites her to join his team, even though she has wronged him by picking his pocket outside in the real world and is seemingly not interested in spending time with him. But, as they're conversing, Gi-hun again gives us a profound piece of dialogue that will reflect his worldview succinctly. It's possible that the exact meaning in Korean is different, seeing as there has been some controversy around the subpar subtitling of the show, but the sentiment remains. As he says, you don't trust people because they're trustworthy, you trust them because you have nothing else to lean on. Gi-hun doesn't trust other people because they are inherently good or obviously trustworthy. He trusts them because he realizes that that is how human beings operate, as a collective. The games are a way of showing him, and us, the audience, that no one can succeed without help, that humanity is fundamentally weak when we act on our own. Even if Gi-hun is the lone survivor by the end of the show, even that is something he is not able to achieve without constant help and sacrifices from others, something he does not forget. Considering the prominent theme of income inequality in the show, we might view this as a message about success in general, where our society often focuses on remarkable individuals who succeed, giving them endless credit, but not the environment and the collective that facilitate their success. Clearly, Gi-hun's words get through to sae-byok, who does join their team, and, putting his life on the line that night, Gi-hun protects her from Doksu. From here, the chasm, the gap of philosophy between Gi-hun and Sang-woo only continues to grow as it comes time for the third game. The players are asked to form teams of 10, and instantly, Sang-woo demands that everyone picks strong men. Openly, he expresses his resentment that their team already has an old man and a woman, both people Gi-hun brought into the fold, remember. And while Gi-hun tries to push back, Sang-woo is insistent that the team be full of strong, physically able men. For Sang-woo, power is the only thing he values. It is why he is so obsessed with money, this thing that represents ultimate power in the world that Squid Game presents us. The power to control the lives of others, as the VIPs do. Beneath that, physical power is all that he can respect, because in the egalitarian world of the games themselves, that is the next best way of asserting dominance, the way that Doksu does, for example. Sang-woo, like Doksu, cannot see the value of what a woman or an old man might bring to the team, because they do not represent an overt show of power. As it turns out, they end up with another woman in their team, Minyo, the seeming girlfriend that Doksu abandons. Again, Sang-woo protests and wants to form a different team, but it is gi-hun who implores that the team keep its diversity. Gi-hun once more displays that collective spirit. He does not value people for what they symbolize, but for what they are as human beings. He recognizes that women and an old man could still be just as valuable, if not more so, than bulky, physically strong men. And this is proved to be true when the tug of war begins. It is thanks to Il-lam's trick and Sang-woo's brains that the team is able to win, not because of their physical strength. And thus, we get further evidence of the triumph of kindness. Had gi-hun not brought Il-lam to the team, they would likely have lost this game and died. Though Sang-woo could not see the value in the old man, gi-hun showed him trust at every step of the way, despite him being an ostensible stranger, and thus that trust is repaid. In the night that follows, gi-hun only continues down his renewed path of kindness. As some of the team suggest hunting others to reduce their numbers, gi-hun shuts down that idea, and as Doksu comes to threaten him and sae-byok, gi-hun simply asks, "Do you really trust the scumbags on your team?" Where gi-hun has worked to foster an environment of trust and acceptance on his team, Doksu's team represents the ideals that perhaps Sang-woo would value: strength, dominance, and self-preservation. But those very things are what cast doubt in Doksu's mind, and unable to trust his own team, he decides not to attack on the second night. As the evening continues though, we get to hear some more fascinating insights into the characters themselves. Sang-woo again shows us evidence of his true nature. When Ali thanks him for saving his life, Sang-woo coldly replies that he only did it to save himself.
감사하고 싶었습니다. 감사할 거 없어. 내가 살자고 한 일이야.
This is a rather foreboding message for the game that will come next, because as we will see, Sang-woo's acts of kindness, even towards Ali, the character he is kindest to in the show, only go on as long as they are not an inconvenience to him. Gi-hun meanwhile notices that Il-lam is coming down with a fever and decides to take care of him, even drawing out a further act of kindness from sae-byok, who gives him her bottle of water. Once more, it's clear that Gi-hun is able to create an environment where people trust and help each other without knowing that any tangible good will come out of it. After all, letting Il-lam die would actually increase their potential winnings, as well as their chance to win it. But still, he and sae-byok retain their humanity to protect and take care of him. As the night passes, the events of the next day are perhaps the most tragic and bittersweet of the show. After Il-lam soils and potentially embarrasses himself, Gi-hun shows him yet another act of kindness, giving him his jacket to protect his dignity. Then, as it comes time to pick partners for the next game, he is rejected by Sang-woo, who opts for Ali as his partner, again valuing the physical strength of Ali over the emotional value that his childhood friend might provide. The pattern is very clear. Initially, Gi-hun is also allured by a selfish approach and he doesn't want to pair up with Il-lam. But when it comes time to make the fateful decision, he does choose the old man. And this decision really cannot be understated in its importance. Remember that at this point, Gi-hun, like everyone else, is assuming that whoever you pick as your partner will be the person you play with for your survival. So choosing the weakest player left in the game is almost an act of suicide. But like in the tug of war, he doesn't value Il-lam for his physical attributes, nor, importantly, does he value his life over his humanity. Gi-hun is led to believe, like everyone else, that if someone doesn't pick a partner, they will be killed. So he chooses to risk his own life to protect Il-lam rather than make a cynical choice and confine his friend to guaranteed death. Unlike Sang-woo, who chooses himself first and foremost and makes the most cynically beneficial decision, Gi-hun still values humanity and collective good the most highly. In the end, this proves to be a cruel twist of fate, as everyone is forced to gamble with their partner for their lives. But this act of kindness is what will ultimately save Gi-hun in this game. What's key again is this idea of collective good. The concept of ganbu is the embodiment of this very idea. We are ganbu. There is no ownership between us, says Il-lam to his friend. And this beautiful shot demonstrates that idea perfectly. Both Il-lam and Gi-hun are wearing the same number jersey, because so far, they've been treating their individual belongings interchangeably with each other. They are both human, and therefore they are part of each other. They are the same. They share their lives and their souls together up until this point, and it is that sense of togetherness that obviously motivates Ilnam to eventually allow Gi-hun to win this game. Some might say that this game represents a selfish Gi-hun who tricks Ilnam into giving him his marbles, but actually what's important here is that Gi-hun does not set about to trick his friend. He simply goes along with the lie that Ilnam begins in the first place. Ilnam is very much in his senses when he allows Gi-hun to change his odd even guesses, because he is happy to let his friend win. This much is said by his own mouth when Gi-hun asks him at that final episode of the show why he lets him live. Ilnam's reply is simply, "Because I had so much fun with you." And here again is why the show is an optimistic one. Because all of Gi-hun's acts of kindness up until this point, especially towards Ilnam, are altruistic. They provide him with no real tangible benefit. There is no cynical gain to be gotten the way that Sang-woo might look for. He simply does it because he values human beings. But the show says that there is a reward for his kindness, that the karmic justice of the world does exist, and the good that Gi-hun sent out eventually comes back his way. Ilnam willingly gives Gi-hun his last marble because he is happy with the experience his friend provided him, and unlike everyone else in the games, he does not want Gi-hun to die. After all, they are ganbu, and one success is the success of both, and so he happily shares with his friend. Now, compare this to how Sang-woo approaches the game. Where Ali protests at the idea of gambling with his friend, Sang-woo coldly demands that they go ahead. Initially, he is fair, explaining the rules to Ali and treating him with equal footing. Again, following that same pattern, because importantly, as he begins to lose, Sang-woo's kindness begins to give way to his deeper, more selfish nature. He accuses Ali of cheating, then physically tries to threaten him, and even tries to emotionally blackmail him. He reminds Ali that he owes him, that Sang-woo had shown him kindness earlier, and now Ali must pay it back by letting him win. Again, remember that even when he thought he was in danger of dying, Gi-hun never once held his good deeds over Ilnam. He never tried to hold it over him that he is the reason Ilnam is alive, or that he took care of him and protected him when he was at his lowest. Because for him, those acts were for their own sake. He did them because they were right. But for Sang-woo, he can and will use kindness as a weapon. And this is where he represents the negative aspects of human selfishness, and also why ultimately he will lose to Gi-hun. But when none of his initial tricks work on Ali, he resorts to the ultimate deceit, making Ali believe that there is a way that they can both win. Again, this is so thematically important. He uses the idea of kindness against Ali. Ali is kind and willing to do anything to help them both get out alive. Knowing this, Sang-woo exploits and betrays his friend to get out himself. It gets him through this round, but as we've seen, the karmic justice of the world is watching, and it will cost him later in the game when his ill deeds catch up to him. This then brings us to our second last game, the Glass Bridge. This game gives us perhaps the most direct example of how Gi-hun's kindness rewards him and is what actually allows him to survive the games. An initially indecisive Gi-hun watches as others barge and push their way to the front, grabbing whatever number jerseys they desire. And in the end, he is left with only two options, first or last. He moves to take the number 1 jersey, convinced that it is at least better than being last. But that is when another player steps forwards and asks if he can take the jersey from him. Remember that almost anyone else in the games at this point would probably reject this offer. To get here, most of the players have betrayed, sabotaged, or directly killed other players, including the people they trusted most in the last round. So a polite request from a competitor should have no bearing on player behavior by this point. But Gi-hun continues to hold on to his humanity. He is moved by this man's request, and for no tangible benefit of his own, he allows him to take the number 1 jersey. Remember that he thinks this is objectively the worst decision, but in return, he is rewarded when the game is revealed and going last proves to be a blessing. Sang-woo, meanwhile, though he is lucky with getting a favorable number, shows again his selfish side. When pressed and worried about his own survival, he pushes the man in front of him in the game and ultimately kills him, an act that repulses Gi-hun. Where Gi-hun has been navigating his way through the games with kindness and cooperation, as we've seen so far, Sang-woo begins to go further and further from this philosophy till finally he reaches this critical point and murders this man. This is why perhaps Gi-hun reacts so angrily at his friend's actions, because he can accept some of the other people in here committing such heinous acts, but his childhood best friend, the man he respected, the man he thought he shared ideals with, turns out to be a selfish, malicious person, just like the people who are organizing the games themselves. This is only solidified by Sang-woo's final act of evil in the games, his murder of sae-byok. From starting the game as a lone wolf pickpocket who trusts no one, sae-byok ends the game showing perhaps the ultimate act of trust for Gi-hun. She entrusts him with the life of her brother, the only person in the world she still cares about. This is all part of what makes Gi-hun unique within the world of Squid Game. He is the one able to draw out acts of kindness and trust from others just by performing such acts himself. It matches that idea of ganbu, what's mine is yours. We are the same. If I show you kindness and trust, you will show me kindness and trust. We can even see evidence of this in sae-byok's dying act. While she's still alive, Gi-hun proposes that they kill Sang-woo, the first and only time he succumbs to a dark thought like this throughout the entire series. And we've already spoken about why. Because he's not trying to eliminate a stranger for more money, but instead, he's trying to eliminate the ghost of his former friend. His anger comes from the fact that he hates seeing what Sang-woo has become, and the morality inside him demands that it be ended. But when Gi-hun is at his lowest moment, when he is at his darkest and most unlike himself, that is when sae-byok provides him with the following words.
그러지 마. 아저씨는 그런 사람 아니잖아.
Even in the few days they've spent together, sae-byok, who has otherwise ceased to trust humanity, remember, can already see that Gi-hun is a kind person. Not the kind of person who would kill or betray, the way so many others have already done in the games. And so again, the acts of kindness that Gi-hun has shown until now, the trust and acceptance, come back around. And this time, rather than saving him from the games, they save him from the darkness within that he had almost given into. The final and ultimate testament to this idea, what we might call the karmic cycle in Squid Game, comes in the last game itself, the titular Squid Game. In a tragic battle filled with anger and hatred, Gi-hun and Sang-woo both fight to the death for the illicit prize pot of the games, watched on by the VIPs. It is a sad and painful scene, initially reflecting a depressing view on humanity. Two childhood best friends killing each other for cash and the entertainment of the ultra-wealthy. But this is also why the ultimate message of Squid Game is an optimistic one, because of what happens next. After a brutal fight, Gi-hun seems to have victory in the palm of his hands. But despite having a chance to win the game and an obscene amount of money, Gi-hun stops and he offers his friend the chance to leave together. Despite everything he's been through, and despite the basically guaranteed money he would lose now, Gi-hun chooses his friend, and ultimately, he chooses humanity. Remember that for almost anyone else in the game, this would be an insane decision. The money here would set up Gi-hun's life forever, and it would solve all the problems he has in the real world, his mother's illness and his daughter's alienation. But as he has done throughout the games, Gi-hun's act of kindness elicits one in turn. Knowing that his friend is too kind, Sang-woo kills himself, finally overriding his selfishness and sense of self-preservation to perform an act that benefits only Gi-hun and not himself. Now of course, the loss of a human life and the loss of a dear friend is not something that Gi-hun wants or would celebrate, so he does not agree with the decision his friend makes. But remember that to Sang-woo, money is the ultimate desire, the ultimate goal of life. So to give up more money than you could even fathom shows just how much Gi-hun's actions move Sang-woo. Gi-hun offers him the gift of life, and in turn, Sang-woo offers his friend the greatest gift he can, absolute money and absolute power and respect in this world. And so, Sang-woo passes, and Gi-hun survives. Not because he's the strongest, the most calculated, or even the smartest player in the games. He survives because he is the kindest. And we, the audience, and Gi-hun return to the real world, and we are asked that question once more. Do you still trust humanity? And the answer from Gi-hun, though he doesn't say it in as many words, is a resounding yes. What Gi-hun has learned and what he consistently displays in the games is the triumph of humanity and the collective spirit. Whatever he does for and with other people. People who are initially strangers, who mean nothing to him and who provide him with no benefit, but he comes to care for them nonetheless, and they for him, all thanks to his trust and his kindness. And that is why in the final scene of the first season, we see Gi-hun make a powerful speech. As he contacts the organizers of the games, he tells them bluntly,
잘 들어. 난 말이 아니야. 사람이야.
This is in reference to what Ilham gave as his reason for running the games. That for the ultra wealthy, watching poor people fight in the games was like betting on horses. And so defiantly, Gi-hun declares that human beings, even those at the absolute lowest stages of their lives, even those who might be selfish, even those who might commit bad acts, even those who might have lost their way, they all deserve kindness. They all deserve to be treated with dignity, and they all deserve to live. Because it is only as a collective, it is only together that humanity can survive and thrive, even through the brutal environment of the games. And that is why the brutal and dark Squid Game is actually an optimistic show about the triumph of human kindness. Thank you for watching this video. Video essays like these take a long time to make, so if you liked what you saw, then please do like, subscribe, and share, but also consider signing up to my Patreon to support me directly. I'd like to thank everyone who is currently a patron, without whom these videos would not be possible. But that's it for this video. I hope I'll see you all very soon.